The man under her bed. The night air was unusually cold for mid-October. A sharp wind cut through the narrow streets of the city, whistling between the skyscrapers that towered like silent giants. Lisa pulled her coat tighter, her breath blooming in small white clouds before her. It was 11:45 p.m. She had just finished a double shift at the hospital, and every muscle in her body felt like it was made of lead. Her footsteps echoed on the wet pavement, a rhythmic, lonely sound in the late-night silence. Most people were already tucked into their warm beds, oblivious to the world outside. But for Lisa, the day was just ending. She lived in an old brownstone on the edge of the historic district, a beautiful building, but one that showed its age in the way the stairs groaned and the pipes clattered in the walls. As she reached the heavy oak front door of her building, she felt the familiar weight of exhaustion. She just wanted to be home. She wanted to lock the world out, eat something quick, and disappear into her blankets for 10 hours. The elevator was out of order again, a common occurrence, leaving her to climb the 4 flights of stairs. The stairwell was dimly lit, the yellow light from the flickering bulbs casting long dancing shadows on the peeling wallpaper. Each step felt heavier than the last. 2nd floor. 3rd floor. By the time she reached the 4th floor, she was slightly out of breath. Lisa reached for her keys in the depths of her bag, her fingers brushing against loose change and old receipts. But when she touched the doorknob of apartment 4B, it gave way. The door wasn't just unlocked, it was slightly ajar, a sliver of dark interior visible from the hallway. She froze. The exhaustion that had been weighing her down vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold, sharp jolt of adrenaline. She was meticulous about her security. Living alone in the city had made her hyper-aware. She remembered, vividly, turning the key twice before leaving that morning. She remembered the metallic click of the deadbolt. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. No answer. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator from inside. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, her hand still hovering over the doorknob. Her mind raced, searching for a logical explanation. Had the landlord been by for repairs? No, they always gave notice. Had she really forgotten? Maybe the shift had been so long that her memory was playing tricks on her. Slowly, carefully, she pushed the door open. The hinges gave a soft, familiar whine. She reached for the light switch and flooded the small entryway with light. Everything looked exactly as she had left it. Her shoes were neatly lined up by the door. Her mail was still on the small console table. She walked into the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs. The dishes were dry in the rack. The air smelled faintly of the jasmine candle she had burned the night before. She checked the living room. The TV was a dark void. The windows were locked from the inside. "Get a grip, Lisa," she muttered to herself, letting out a long, shaky breath. "You're just tired. You're exhausted and your brain is looking for monsters where there are none." She convinced herself that she must have simply failed to turn the key all the way. It was a mechanical failure, or a human one born of fatigue. She walked back to the front door, closed it firmly, and turned the deadbolt. Click. The sound brought a wave of relief. She was safe. She was home. She went to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, the cool liquid soothing her dry throat. But as she stood there, leaning against the counter, the silence of the apartment started to feel heavy. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a sleeping home. It was a thick, expectant silence. She decided to skip dinner. Her appetite had vanished. She just wanted to wash her face and go to bed. She walked toward the hallway that led to her bedroom and bathroom. Then she heard it. A creak. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but in the absolute stillness of the apartment, it sounded like a gunshot. It came from the hallway, near the bedroom door. Lisa stopped mid-step. She didn't move. She didn't even breathe. She waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 10 seconds. Creak. There it was again. The unmistakable sound of a floorboard under pressure. Lisa knew her apartment. She knew which boards were silent and which ones complained. This was the board right outside her bedroom door, the one that always groaned if you stepped on it just right. Her heart began to race again, but this time it was different. This wasn't the jumpy adrenaline of a scare. This was the cold, paralyzing dread of certainty. Someone was in the apartment with her. The footsteps started. They were slow, heavy, deliberate. They weren't the hurried movements of a startled burglar. They were the steps of someone who was taking their time. Thump, creak, thump. They were moving away from the bedroom, coming toward the kitchen. Toward her. Lisa backed away, her hands trembling so violently that she almost dropped her glass. She reached for her phone on the counter, her fingers fumbling with the screen. No signal. The bars were empty. "No, no, no," she whimpered. The old building often had dead zones, but never in the kitchen. The footsteps stopped just around the corner of the hallway. A shadow stretched across the linoleum floor, a long, distorted shape that didn't belong to any piece of furniture. Lisa stood paralyzed, her eyes wide, staring at the edge of the wall. Then, a voice. A man's voice. It wasn't a shout. It was a whisper, low and intimate, as if he were standing right next to her ear. "I know you're home, Lisa." The sound of her name sent a wave of name through her. He knew her. He had been waiting. Lisa let out a jagged scream, the sound tearing through the apartment. She didn't think, she just ran. She didn't go for the front door. The shadow was between her and the exit. She bolted into the bathroom and slammed the door shut, throwing the flimsy lock just as a heavy weight hit the other side. Bam! The door shuddered in its frame. Lisa backed into the far corner of the small room, tripping over the bath mat. She scrambled into the bathtub, pulling the plastic curtain shut as if it could provide some kind of shield. Bam! Again, the impact. The wood groaned. Dust shook down from the ceiling. "Go away! Get out!" she screamed, her voice cracking. There was no response, only another thunderous blow against the door. Whoever was on the other side was throwing their entire body weight against it. Lisa huddled in the tub, her knees pulled to her chest, her phone clutched in her hand like a talisman, even though it was useless. She waited for the door to give way. She waited for a hand to reach through the splintered wood. Bam! And then, nothing. The silence returned, but this time it was even more terrifying. Lisa stared at the door, her eyes burning from the strain of not blinking. She listened for footsteps, for breathing, for a scratch at the wood. Nothing. She waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Her legs went numb. Every small sound, the settling of the building, the wind outside, made her jump. 20 minutes passed. She didn't move until she heard the distant, muffled sound of sirens. Then, the heavy thumping of boots in the hallway outside her apartment. "Police, open up!" Lisa didn't come out until she heard the officers announce themselves again. When she finally unlocked the bathroom door, her hands were so cramped she could barely turn the knob. 3 officers stood in her living room, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They had forced the front door. "He's gone," one of the officers said, putting a hand on her shoulder. "We've searched the rooms. The apartment is clear." Lisa sat on her sofa, wrapped in a blanket an officer had found. She was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. The officers began a more thorough search, looking for signs of entry, checking the closets, looking under the furniture. One of the officers, a younger man with a grim expression, walked into her bedroom. Lisa watched from the doorway as he knelt down and shone his flashlight under her bed. He froze. "Officer Miller, get over here," he called out, his voice tense. Lisa walked closer, her heart sinking. The officer pulled something out from under the dust ruffle, a backpack, a black worn nylon bag, then a half-empty water bottle, several food wrappers, and a neat pile of men's clothing, a hoodie, a pair of jeans, and socks. Lisa felt the world tilt. This wasn't a break-in. This wasn't a random encounter. "How long?" she whispered. The officer looked at her, his eyes full of a pity that made her skin crawl. "Based on the amount of trash and the state of the clothes, Lisa, someone has been living under here, probably for at least a week." He had been there, while she slept, while she changed, while she lived her life, thinking she was alone. He had been inches away, separated only by a thin mattress and the darkness, watching her, waiting for the moment she came home exhausted enough to be vulnerable. And the most terrifying part? Despite the DNA on the bottle, the fingerprints on the wrappers, and the description of the backpack, the police never found him. Lisa moved out that night. She never went back to that apartment. But even now, years later, every time she enters a room, every time she lies down in a bed, she can't help but look. She can't help but wonder if somewhere, in the dark corners she can't see, he is still watching, still waiting, still knowing she's home.